In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Job's comforter is a person who, in attempting to support someone in distress, makes the situation worse. Job was surrounded by many of them as he grappled with this question about why God allows the innocent to suffer. He himself, of course, claiming to be one of them. Now, his friends assure him that only sinners suffer. And therefore, if he's suffering, then he must be a sinner. And if you are a sinner, to deny that you are a sinner is a sin. And so it goes on in vicious circles. Well, the book of Job tries to grapple with this through the whole of its length. And it doesn't give any answers to the questions about suffering, other than to say that suffering is part of life. Now, those who have no relationship with God and who suffer have just to suck it up, as they say, and get on, move on. But those who do love God and who suffer need to ask the question, who is this God whose creation contains so much suffering? In the center of our faith is Christ, the wounded healer, who has embraced this uncertain and fragile life of ours to show us that suffering and death does not have the last word. His resurrection makes it clear that out of suffering and out of loss, new life can emerge. And today's gospel reading gives us examples of this and what our response to healing must be when it happens. After healing the sick in the synagogue, Jesus went to Simon's house and cured his mother-in-law, who was suffering from a fever. And her response was to get up out of bed and to serve him and his disciples. Now, of course, at one level, this means that she got out of bed and got on with her domestic chores, providing a meal, therefore proving in the gospel reading that she had in fact been healed of the fever. But at another level, she is showing that the proper response to Jesus' love is that of being of service to him. You see, the healing miracles in the gospel are only signs for those who can see their meaning. So Mark's gospel doesn't tell us that being healed brings people to faith. In fact, he tells us that many people were healed, but they didn't follow him. They had no evidence that they became a disciple of Jesus. The healings are signs to those who already have faith that he is indeed the Messiah, the chosen one of God. And in carrying out the healings, Jesus is again revealing who he is for those who have faith. And the gospel reading also tells us the source of service for Jesus and what it must be for his disciples. Now, while others are asleep, Jesus goes out into a desert place. He doesn't go to a sacred site. He went to a place apart, not to rush through the Jewish daily office for the day, but to spend time in stillness and contemplation with his Father. And on this occasion, he had gone away for so long that the disciples were getting worried and sent out a search party for him to find out why he was neglecting all the people who had started to queue up looking to be healed. Well, they didn't get healed. Jesus moved on to another place because his mission was to preach the good news of God's love and the defeat of evil. It is through prayer that Jesus discovers the priorities of his mission. And we also see that Jesus' power to overcome evil does not come from himself, but from his Father. And secondly, prayer, devotion, and contemplation must be central in the lives of all disciples. If we are all to be servants and servant leaders who proclaim the victory of the resurrection, then prayer must be central to our lives. And St. Paul's mission was to preach this good news to the Gentiles. And of course, in the reading we heard some people accused Paul of being something of a freeloader, preaching in order to get free board and lodging. Well, of course, Paul denies this and shares something of what it means to be a servant of Jesus. He says that he presents the good news in the way that his hearers will understand. If he's preaching to a Jewish group, then he taught them in the Jewish way. If he was speaking to the Gentiles, then he addressed them as a Gentile. To the weak, then he admitted his own weaknesses so that he could communicate the gospel with them. In other words, he met people where they were and delivered the news in ways they could understand and comprehend and accept. Now, in our desire to evangelize, we must not compromise the truth of God, but we meet people where they are so that we can lead them to understand the truth of God that the gospel proclaims. And St. Paul reminds the Corinthians in another part of his letter that disciples possess differing gifts that all disciples are called to exercise. The clergy and the ordained are to be the spiritual leaders, and laity are to be their collaborators. The laity don't serve God by pretending to be clergy, but to use their own experience in teaching, in pastoral care, and business skills that they learned and have learned and practiced in the secular world in order to build up the church's mission. Now, the church really is facing a difficult period of change. The days of clergy expected